Hey everybody, this is Chris from the Truce Podcast. We'll get into a discussion of the birds and the bees in this episode. Nothing gross, but you've got about 30 seconds to pause the show if this is not the best time. We're in the process of putting together an ad campaign that will run on Facebook this summer, and we're researching some great episodes. But because I'm so busy, in lieu of a regular episode this week, we've got this podcast extra about something I'd never heard of before doing the interview, and it dovetails nicely with our story about Abby Johnson. This story was recorded in the press room at the National Religious Broadcasters Convention, which is why there is a little bit of background noise.
So my name is Nate Birt. You can reach me by email, nathanjbirt@gmail.com.
Nate is skinny and wears glasses. He looks a full 10 years younger than he is.
I am a journalist by trade, but I also am a father. So my wife and I have 4 children. We have 3 biological children and an adopted daughter. And she was adopted through embryo adoption, which many people aren't aware of.
Which is the subject of this podcast extra, embryo adoption. Nate is going to explain what that is.
I am only speaking from what I know from listening to other people. My wife and I have never faced infertility, but my understanding is that many couples want a baby so badly, but for some reason, either the mother or the father or both have something in their DNA that's not allowing them to create, to bring a baby to term in the natural way.
So the next move is usually in vitro fertilization, taking sperm from a man and mixing it in a lab with mature eggs from a woman. If the sperm and the egg come together to form an embryo, then that embryo is placed inside of a woman and carried to term like a normal pregnancy. If maybe you're a couple who can't have a baby naturally.
And so they pursue IVF, in vitro fertilization. Many times they go through multiple cycles, and that creates many more embryos than would be used by any family.
They've removed several eggs from a woman and put them in with a lot of sperm. Sometimes more than one egg gets fertilized. Many pro-life people argue that life begins at conception, when egg and sperm form an embryo. That creates a bit of a moral conundrum with in vitro fertilization. What happens to all of those other fertilized eggs that don't get placed into a woman's uterus?
And so as a result, we have many couples that come to the end of their family building process, have these remaining embryos, and then there are so many ethical, spiritual, moral implications of what do we do with these embryos that oftentimes the best, easiest thing to do, and it's still expensive, is to place those embryos in frozen storage, pay $60, $70 a month in perpetuity.
What do you do with all those frozen embryos? Not everyone can pay money every month to keep them frozen. And not every family can sustain having more and more kids. Is it okay to thaw the embryos and discard them? Do you delay the inevitable by keeping them frozen? Or is there a better option? That's why Nate wrote his book, Frozen but Not Forgotten.
And so there are more than 1 million frozen embryos in storage, and so the question that my wife brought to me was, why don't we pursue embryo adoption to build our family? And as a dad, I think there's something in a lot of men, even Christian men, that really sort of it's grating against the notion that our children need to be our own biological, our own genetics. And so when we recognize that we are all adopted by God, it really reframes how I viewed adoption and how I think more dads can probably think about it as well.
Nate and his wife adopted 3 embryos. The first 2 didn't make it. Apparently, thawing them does not always work out.
However, one of them did survive and was transferred to my wife Julie's uterus, and 9 months later she gave birth to our daughter Phoebe, and she just celebrated her first birthday last week.
And now they have their daughter Phoebe because of this special kind of adoption. What should be done with all of those frozen embryos? Send us a comment on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. You can also email a voice memo to us at trucepodcast@yahoo.com. And we may even use it on the show. You can find more about Nate and his book at frozenbutnotforgotten.com. We'll have links to him on our website at trucepodcast.com, where you can also find notes, pictures, and links to donate to this podcast. God willing, we'll be back next week with a full episode of Truce. Thanks for listening.